Hi guys, we're back for another video, and this time we're going to be covering cellular respiration, which is a huge topic in AP biology and one that I struggle with myself. So I think that this video will both help myself and anybody watching this to understand the basics of cellular respiration a little bit more. I went through this video the first time around trying to pinpoint what I was going to say, but we're just going to see how this turns out. So we want to go over energy basics first. So energy is required to do work. Anything that you want to do, you need to have energy to do it. You need it to do things, to move things, to put things together. That's what energy does. Now you have the laws of thermodynamics, which basically explain energy, the basics of it. The first law of thermodynamics states that the total amount of energy in the universe remains constant. It's not going to change. It can be transferred from one form to another, but it's not going to change overall. And the second law of thermodynamics states that when energy is converted from one form to another, some energy is lost. And it's not really lost. We know this from the first law of thermodynamics. But what that means is that the entropy in the universe is going to be increased, and entropy means disorder. So every time energy is transferred from one form to another, the disorder in the universe is going to increase. And that's about all I have for the energy basics. Now we're going to go on to generating ATP, and we know that ATP is an insanely important molecule in using energy in reactions. And there are two basic mechanisms of phosphorylation in cells, and phosphorylation is basically the process of taking ADP, adenosine diphosphate, and adding a phosphate group to it to make, or an inorganic phosphate to it to make ATP, which is what we use and we break down to get energy. So we have substrate level phosphorylation, and that occurs when a phosphate group and its associated energy are transferred to ADP to form ATP. And then you have oxidative phosphorylation, and that occurs when a phosphate group is added to ADP to form ATP, but the energy for the bond doesn't accompany the phosphate group. Instead, electrons give up energy for generating ATP during each step of a process, and that's going to be where electrons are transferred from one molecule, an electron carrier, to another in a chain of reactions, and you're going to see this in the electron transport chain in aerobic respiration. Now, there are three major steps of aerobic respiration, and these are going to require oxygen, except for the first step, which is glycolysis. The second step is the Krebs cycle, or the citric acid cycle, and the third is oxidative phosphorylation, which we just talked about. Now, when oxygen is not present, cells will generate ATP by anaerobic respiration. And there are two pathways for this: alcohol fermentation and lactic acid fermentation. And we'll get to both of those in detail a little bit later. So glycolysis, think of this as glyco, sugar, and lysis, splitting. So you're splitting sugar. In this case, the sugar is glucose. So at the end of glycolysis, you're going to end up with taking one glucose molecule to make 2 pyruvate, 2 NADH, which is an electron carrier, and a net gain of 2 ATP. So glycolysis gives you 2 ATP, and it gives you the pyruvate, which is basically the starting factor for the Krebs cycle. The Krebs cycle is going to be summarized as basically you're taking pyruvate, you're oxidizing it to make acetyl-CoA. And then the Krebs cycle, at the end of it, it's going to be having ATP and NADH and FADH and CO2 released. So the CO2 produced by the Krebs cycle is going to be the CO2 that animals exhale when they breathe. So if you think about the basic formula for aerobic respiration or cellular respiration, you're going to think glucose and oxygen goes to ATP, gives you ATP, and then also CO2 and H2O, and the CO2 is going to come from the Krebs cycle. Now, oxidative phosphorylation we talked about earlier, and it's basically going to take it's going to be the process of producing ATP from NADH and FADH, the electron carriers. So the electrons are going to pass along an electron transport chain, and that's going to consist of proteins that pass those electrons on to the next. And then at the end, the final electron acceptor is oxygen, and that's where the oxygen is going to accept 2 electrons, and together with 2 hydrogen ions, it's going to form water, and that's the water that we see at the end of the basic formula for cellular respiration. So, this all occurs in the mitochondria, and there are different sections of the mitochondria that this happens in, but I'm not going to go into detail on that in this video. You can always look up cellular respiration in another video, and I'm sure they will cover it in that, but I don't want to because I want to just give you the basics in this video and just the details that you'll want to know. So, how many ATPs? Theoretically, you are supposed to gain 2 ATPs from glycolysis, a net gain of 2 ATPs, and then I believe 2 ATPs from the Krebs cycle, and then 34 from oxidative phosphorylation and the electron transport chain. However, this number is not always going to be correct. It's not going to happen like this in every cell every time. It's actually going to hover more around 30 ATP, like I said, due to variations in mitochondria, different things, different people, they're going to produce more energy, less energy. It's going to vary. So then we have anaerobic respiration, and this happens if oxygen is not present. So think of it, once again, I'm a runner, I'm going to reference running. If you are a sprinter and you're in a race, at the beginning, you're able to give your muscles enough oxygen that they can perform aerobic respiration. However, it's going to get to a point at the end of your race where your muscles are going to start burning, and that's from buildup of lactic acid. And this occurs as a result of anaerobic respiration because your muscles are not getting enough oxygen to do aerobic respiration. So, alcohol fermentation occurs in plants, fungi, and bacteria. And basically, you're going to convert pyruvate to ethanol at the end of that. And, one second, sorry. The page isn't staying down. So if we want to go into more detail in that, you take pyruvate and convert that to, I don't know how to say it, honestly, I'm sorry. You convert it to something. And for each pyruvate, 1 CO2 and 1 of this other thing is produced. And then this other thing is converted to ethanol. And the importance of this step is that the energy in NADH is used to drive this reaction, releasing NAD+, which is going to be, I'm trying to find the spot that I underlined, sorry. It's going to be used in glycolysis again. So this process is going to produce way less ATP than aerobic respiration, which means that aerobic respiration is much more efficient, but animals can, or not animals, sorry, I'm talking about lactic acid fermentation in this, but both of them produce less ATP. Sorry. Let me take a step back here and talk about lactic acid fermentation first. So in lactic acid fermentation, the only difference is that pyruvate is converted to lactate instead of ethanol at the end, and lactate is also known as lactic acid. And in the process, NADH gives up its electrons again to form NAD+, and now, just as in alcohol fermentation, the NAD+ can be used for glycolysis. So, both of these processes are going to produce way less ATP and therefore are less efficient than aerobic respiration, and I think that's important to know. That's all for this lesson. I hope this was useful and helpful.